Hey everyone, Tactics here. In this video, I'll be going over everything that you need to know as a tank player in the brand new NERUB-AR Palace raid on both normal and heroic difficulties. Do not worry though if you are not a tank player, as I will still have you covered, as I'll be releasing a general boss strategies video for normal and heroic early next week when I have live footage. Plus, I'll be dropping a guide to Queen and Sureki for everyone shortly after that, so make sure you are subscribed to the channel so you know when those videos get posted. Now, for this video, I'm going to be going boss by boss here, starting from the beginning, and it is going to be a little different as I'm going to be using PTR testing footage that I have, so it's not from the live game. That being said, almost everything is still the same in terms of tank mechanic stuff, and I'll do my best to point out any potential areas that have changed in terms of what we're going to be covering. Things like tank swaps, things like where you should be putting your defensives, things like how you should be positioning the boss, and just other tank responsibilities are all going to be covered in this video. And like I mentioned, no Queen and Sureki in this specific video because she was not available for testing on the PTR, but all that stuff for tanks is going to be covered in my full Queen and Sureki guide coming next week at some point. That is it for the yapping, though. Let's hop into it, starting at the very first boss, Ulgrax the Devourer here. So basically, what you want to do is you see we're on this big platform, and we are taking the boss towards the center of the platform. And the reason for that is there's this big carnivorous contest ability that comes out here in just a second. It's going to debuff one person with a soak that you see right there. And basically, you want to dump your whole raid into this, but the whole thing is this pulls in players that are soaking this ability. So you want to make sure they have distance to run away from this pull in, right? So that is why you want to tank towards the middle, and you want to let the soak go towards the edge. In terms of other things, these webbings are quite annoying. They will root you in place. So when you're not actively tanking, if you have some sort of root break like Freedom Effect, Immunity, AMS works, you can run through a bunch of these things to clear up some space. One of the mechanics also works against it. I believe it's the acid on random target players here. This will also clear it, but tanks can't get that. So if you have immunities, you can clear that. In terms of the taunt off, I just got hit by it. It's one set of the debuff going out basically, and it just puts 20 stacks of a healing reduction on you. So you need to make sure again you have that defensive up for the initial hit, because you're not going to be healed for like a good 10-ish seconds afterwards because of how big that healing reduction actually is. Now the intermission here starts at 0% energy. So he's doing it now. He's going to jump to the center here, and he's going to spawn a little portal on the ground. You want to avoid all that. And basically what's going to happen, he's going to spawn a bunch of eggs on one side of the room. And these eggs are important because that's where the ads are going to come from. So you can see here, these eggs are all spawning here. And the other thing these eggs tell you is that the boss is going to come up on the opposite side of the platform when he's done doing all of his charges. So you want to try and actually probably have your group kind of hang out on this area away from the ads, and let the ads funnel into you, because you're going to have to take the bodies of these ads to the boss. And if you allow these ads to walk towards you, then that means that your entire group is running less, because all the ads bodies are in this area instead of all the way over here. So something to keep in mind. Try and be patient with the ads here and let them walk to you rather than going over to them. Otherwise, you're just kind of dodging here. Here are the ads, picking them all up. There's also Mythic, by the way, so there's big ads on this, but you can ignore those. And then the boss came up where I mentioned, and we kind of killed them probably a bit too far away. So we have to do a bit of a run. One thing to note, you can see this bleed stack here. That is from the ad, so be aware if you get to higher stack. It doesn't hurt too badly. It is a first boss, but if you need a bleed cleanse from like an evoker or something like that, you can get it. And then otherwise here, you see we're just... well, one thing to note, one of the tanks you can see here, our DK... he stayed in range of the boss, because sometimes while the boss is doing this AoE ramping party damage, he would melee between casts. So just be aware of that. Make sure at least one of your tanks is staying in melee range, the one with aggro, well, if your other tank is running around. So don't both be away from the boss. Otherwise, that is Ulgrax all done and dusted. All right, we've got the second boss here, Bloodbound Horror. And for this one, you are going to want to split your raid down into two groups with a tank in each. It's a little bit like the Anduin mechanic here. The gruesome disgorge is what the ability is called. It's a tank frontal on the current active tank, and basically anyone who gets hit by it, it's going to be this. It's kind of hard to see the animation, but anyone who gets hit by it goes down and is able to actually see the ads and target them and kill them. So you want to split into two groups, and one group goes down with the first tank. The other, as you can see, we're over here, and I'm going to taunt off after each cast. You want to alternate there. In terms of where you want to put this, you can see the ads are there, so you actually have a bit of notice. I'll try and do it when I get it. Oh, voice is on. There we go. You can see this giant like voidy thing that appears on the platform. That is about 15 seconds before the frontal happens. So it gives you some warning on where you want to point the frontal, because that's where the main set of ads spawn. So when you see that, the tank who's going to go down and their group should rotate towards it, and you should point the frontal there. And that's where you should go down. You can probably see it in a few seconds here. Fast forward. Oh, we already did it. Yeah. Because you have about a 15-second, 20-second grace period before from seeing these big purple orbs to this frontal happening. Boom, we all go down. We're in for the ads. This is the tank ad, the Lost Watchers, so you need to make sure you pick this up. These other guys are just caster mobs. They aren't tankable, so just drag the Watcher around. The Harbingers should be the priority, and so the Watcher will live for a bit. Also, make sure you do keep kicks on the Watcher itself. These beams here are the tank mechanic on Heroic. They only appear on Heroic, and basically it's on either side of the boss's arms. You see the two arms flowing out. They always spawn on the boss's arms, and they always rotate counterclockwise. As you can see here, they're going in this direction. And this will always come, again, like 10-15 seconds after a group is sent down into the ad area. And basically what you want to do here is you want to make sure you aim this such that it doesn't troll your downstairs group. And what I mean by that is that later on in the fight, you're going to fast forward here, and you're going to notice more ads start spawning later on in the fight. So you can see there's ads there. And this is a perfect example. There's another ad now because we've gone through later in the fight, and there's now more ads spawning. So you can see here, there's a bunch of ads here, and there's one individual ad here. So you're going to see the group is going to go down. They're down. They're killing these ads. And I want to make sure that they are not trolled by this. So the main group of ads is here. That's where they went down. They want to kill these guys, and they want to rotate this way as fast as possible to get to this ad. So you can see I'm standing here to put the beams that rotate counterclockwise such that it's a little bit blocking here, but they have nothing in their way to run to the next ad. That's the important thing. You want to make sure that the downstairs group is not obstructed in any way to get to their ad. So there's the lines. It's going to rotate counterclockwise, and they're just free to run with that tank ad, like I mentioned, because it's not their priority, all the way to that final ad. And that's just how you want to always kind of position those beams if you can help it. Sometimes they spawn a lot closer, but that was a perfect example of how they can spawn on opposite sides as well. Again, that only happens on Heroic though, so on normal, there's nothing else to worry about. And that is also the entire fight for tanks. This boss is stationary, of course, so there's nothing really to do about positioning of the boss itself, just more positioning of where you are, because you want to make sure, again, you're pointing at the main group of ads if you are the tank going down. That is the second boss, Heroic Sikran. Sikran is the next boss here. This one's pretty straightforward. It's a burn one. There's two main strats here in terms of positioning that both function almost exactly the same. What we're doing here is we're tanking the boss in the middle, sounds on again, and we're having the players drop the charges on the edge. What you can also do is you could like tank here on the edge, and you could rotate around in any direction, and you could have everyone drop behind the boss. Either works totally fine. So do whatever is best for you. We're rotating around the middle in a smaller rotation, and then we're dropping all of the ads along the side here, and then we're going to rotate every time that happens. So you see the ads get dropped, then we're going to do the brakes. They'll get detonated, and then we're going to rotate slightly to put more space to drop, etc., etc. Just keep rotating around the room like that. The tank buster here is this combo of 2 exposes and a phase lunge. Expose is a shorter debuff now. It's only 6 seconds long now. And it's a physical damage amp, all physical damage, including boss melee. So you don't want to be taking the boss, but you do want to have the starting tank take the first 2 stacks of expose. You want to take both those stacks. Of course, the second stack is going to hit harder, so be aware of that. And then the other tank will take this phase lunge, which is a big mixed magic and physical hit. So make sure you have a defensive for that. And then that tank will then tank the boss because they don't have a physical damage amp. They have a phase lunge damage amp. So they are safe to tank the boss. Obviously, they don't want to take the next phase lunge. Well, the other tank doesn't want to tank the boss, but they are fine to take the next phase lunge. So then you just alternate from there. Whoever took the phase lunge is now going to take the 2 exposes, and you just kind of swap like that. Otherwise, though, for tanks, it's really just the minor movement thing. Like I said, if you're doing the strat in the middle, pick a direction, counterclockwise, clockwise, doesn't matter. You could also do the side on the strat again, clockwise, counterclockwise. Doesn't matter. All of these strats are going to accomplish the exact same thing, and that is making sure you have enough space for these puddles that spawn. On normal, these puddles will despawn after 2 minutes, so there's actually much less of a concern about space. But on Heroic, these puddles are permanent, so you do need to actually be using your space well. You do also want to make sure that you aren't in the path of these phase blade lines. I'll try and back up. See, this line does come out from the boss in an order. So if anyone was right here, you would get hit by this phase blade. And on heroic specifically, that would spawn another simulacrum. On normal, it doesn't. But on heroic, it does. So anyone, including the tank, getting hit here is very, very bad. So just tanks, watch out for that. Otherwise, there's just a big AoE and shattering sweep after a few of these casts. And then that is just kind of like a knockback. I think I probably skipped it here. Here it is. Just an AoE around the boss. I believe the visual is better now, by the way. But if you get hit by it now, you get a pretty big damage amp on you for a while. So you do not want to get hit by that. Make sure you're running out of that circle. And then the fight just continues repeating from there. And you just rotate around in a circle. Very straightforward. Third boss, so not going to be too complicated there. Rasha'nan is the next boss here. Oh, again. Sound. Woo. Another very straightforward tank fight because this boss is stationary and sometimes jumps around, so you just kind of follow the boss. And otherwise here, the tank buster is Savage Assault. Here it is. And the one thing about this tank buster is it tends to happen back to back relatively quickly. Not immediately, but relatively quickly. So you want to be quick with your taunts here. What it does basically is it gives you a dot after it hits you based on the unmitigated damage. So while the initial hit is not super scary on its own, that dot can get quite scary if you don't put a mitigation up for that hit. So you do want to make sure, even if you're surviving the hit, if you're surprised like, hey, this dot is absolutely wrecking me, commit more to the initial hit. That's what you need to do. Otherwise here, there's not a ton for tanks. You kind of just stay in the center towards the boss a little bit to give everyone room to do stuff around you with all of these other mechanics. The infested spawn are some ads that are pretty relevant to tanks. Let's fast forward a bit to see them. Basically, they're always going to target random players, and they will always start by hitting that random player first. But then after that, these are ads that do need to be picked up in order to minimize group damage. So there's some things that are really, really good for this. Obviously, any AoE stuns, things like Shockwave, things like Leg Sweep. Mass Grip is absolutely huge to group these ads up. AoE Taunt is also really, really good, right? So using those things here to just minimize the amount of damage they're doing to other players is really good. But again, the initial hit on them, then they're going to immediately bite after as well. So there's a certain amount of damage that you can't mitigate, but you want to mitigate as much as you possibly can. Otherwise, active tank, you just want to stay in melee. Boss sometimes gets up and flies away. You can see here, and goes to another one of these ledges somewhere else in the room. There's some interrupts, but outside of this moment here, you do want to make sure as a tank that you are always in melee of range of the stationary boss. Otherwise, bad stuff is going to happen. I think it's the Tacky Burst is the ability name. It's just a bunch of raid damage. So always, always, always stay in melee of this boss while you are actively tanking. Now we get a step up. So these first 4 bosses are all relatively lower tank damage, at least from PTR testing. Broodtwister and Nexus-Princess are the first kind of significant steps up in terms of the damage intake that you're going to be facing. So basically this place has 3 different sections. Each different section has one ad that has more spawns inside of it based on the egg types. I'll talk about more of that in the general strategy video. I'm not going to talk about that a ton here. For the tanks, the tank buster is actually right there at the start. Volatile Concoction. So this is a nature hit, and this is an 8-second dot on the tank. And then when that dot expires, it blows up for raid damage. So the important part here is now making sure that you are healthy at the end of that cast. So whether that's, popping a defensive that lasts for the whole thing, you see he was basically full health. We almost took no damage. So that's what you want to do. I think actually there was like an example later on in the fight maybe where I take a lot of damage from this. I'm like a quarter HP here missing. Boom, right? So you can see the more health you're missing as a tank, the damage drastically increases. So you really want to make sure you as a tank are topped, have defensive up, and make sure if you have any self-healing, that is also used towards the end of that dot so that you are as healthy as possible for that final tick. Positioning wise, as you see here, the third of the room that we're currently in will constantly fill up with this goo from there's like an altar like location container at one side of it, and that's always where it starts filling up with goo. And basically you want to make sure you're keeping all the mobs away from the goo, because if they ever touch the goo, then they get empowered, and that's very bad for you. Usually a wipe, maybe you could live it on normal, but most likely a wipe. Some things like the worm here are stationary, so they need to be cleave down. So, you know, bringing the boss over to things like the worm to get them cleaved down is good just for effective damage. The colossal spiders here need to be picked up by tanks. They have this vicious bite, which is a nature damage hit, but also increases in damage by 25% per cast here. Let's see if I'm targeting the mob. I am not. It's okay. You can see above their nameplate, they have a 25% damage increase, and every time they cast, this increases as well. So again, keep these under the boss, keep everything together, and cleave them down. We didn't find that these needed to be focused on our testing, but again, damage scaling could be different. Potentially, you do need to actually focus these spiders when they're alive if their tank damage is too much. But I would try and not focus them and just cleave them down with Broodtwister, and then see if that is a problem for your group. For the small lads, there are another set of mobs where things like mass grips and AoE stuns are very valuable. Here they are. Basically, it spawns a bunch of guys. They're going to fixate people. And so if you have things like Shockwave, like Leg Sweep, like Mass Grip, very, very useful in this situation. Chaos Nova too, right? To stop the fixate cast, to prevent them from leeching or infesting a player. So it makes it very easy to just lock them all down into one spot and just cleave them down before they cause too much havoc. Otherwise, you're just rotating through the three areas of the room as they fill with goo. You can see here, when we have designated areas that we need to detonate these specific eggs for, we bring the boss closer to them. That's how you can kind of force players to be in the correct area and reduce movement for your group again. But otherwise, outside of that minor positioning thing there, you can do, you're really just kind of hoping other players are hitting the eggs and then making sure that you are picking up the tank ads or dragging on top of like the worms or locking down the little guys. That is your job as a tank. Now, let's go to Nexus-Princess here, where this is a pretty big positioning fight, namely the Nether Rift ability, because of the like gravity aspect of it is actually very important for tanks. So here it is going out on random players, because tanks are able to counteract the positioning of where these other players are dropping these things out. So you see, boom, they're dropping them out. 3 of them were over there, and I do recommend using this hexagon. Yeah, the hexagon here. I'll talk about that in the general strategy video. But they're going to drop it there. Sounds on. And now, shortly after these guys spawn, the boss always will put one in front of herself, so directly on the active tank. And so what you can do then, because these are going to turn into gravity wells, is we can move to counteract the gravity based on where these were put. So it's there, there, and there. And so if we drop one over here, that's going to counteract the gravity here. So boom, there's the rift. And all of a sudden this pull-in is going to happen, and it's not going to be overly powerful in any direction, and you can see we're all just safe in the middle. So that is kind of your job as a tank here, is to see where the initial drops are, and then after this there's going to be charges, and the rifts are going to change position. So here's the charges. So now after this, tank again needs to look, okay, where are the portals? There's a couple over here and there's one over here. So we need to now put this into a good spot, because again, shortly after this we're going to get a new rift here, and we're going to drop the rift. Boom. And we see there's a double there and a double there, and that's going to keep us safe like in this area, because there was a double stacked on top of each other. That one's a little weird, but basically you need to see initially in the phase, where do players spawn the rifts, move accordingly to counteract their rift positions, and then again, when the dash happens, where did the mobs dash to? Position the boss accordingly to counteract their positions. They're going to dash one more time, but the boss only ever does the pull in twice, so you don't need to worry about positioning here. Then there's the intermission, and then after this there's just one extra rift that spawns. So there's going to be 4 players now with rifts that you can see here. Boom, 1 2 3 4, and again we're going to see where they go. Boom, 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 and we're going to move the boss accordingly to kind of try and counteract that. Going to move it here, drop a rift here, and again that is just kind of repeating how the fight goes. And just that is literally the fight. Just repeats from here with more rifts, basically. In terms of the tank buster, it's a simple one. Again, it's called Void Shredders. It's basically a channeled hit. It's not a combo. It just channels into the active tank, and each hit deals more and more damage than the previous hit. It has a 25% increase with each hit of the channel, and also stacks up a dot on you. So it's either 1 2 3 4 hits in the whole channel. Each hit again hits harder, and now you have 4 stacks of this shadow dot for 30 seconds. So you're always swapping here after a channel happens. You can taunt mid channel if the boss doesn't move over to you, so it finishes the channel before she actually swaps, so don't worry about that. And then you just take it once. Big defensive every time, of course, and that's all you really need to do there. Other thing as a tank, I guess, is just to make sure you're not actually getting hit by the charge lines. Not these, because this will put a dot on you that will then explode and shoot out orbs on heroic, which is very, very bad, of course, if you're a tank in melee. So just make sure you are definitely avoiding does. Otherwise, pretty straightforward tank fight, but I'm positioning super important as a tank here. And if you know, you can have a non-tank ping positioning too. Pings are probably going to be really useful for raid leads on this, and they can be watching and they can ping immediately where they want the tank to move to. But just immediate movement after you see where those Nexus rifts initially spawn and where the dashes put them is very important to counteract the rift pull-ins. That brings us to the second to last boss and the last boss of this video, the Silken Court. This is a 2-boss encounter. Both bosses do need to be tanked. Both bosses are dangerous in that they have tank busters or tank related debuffs. However, they don't both move. So a NERUB-AR does move freely with you, though his movement is a bit slow because he has a lot of ability casts and he'll stop to cast them. Skynspinner does not move with the tank. She instead is stationary and randomly jumps around the room. Now, starting with a NERUB-AR, she's very simple. The whole fight, he has this this tank buster called Piercing Strike. It just hits you. It's a only physical damage hit, and the damage amp it does is only to the Piercing Strike itself. So you are usually fine to taunt after 2 stacks of this. He casts it 4 times the entire phase. You can take 2 and 2. On normal and heroic, you are actually able to taunt after 1 stack, though I don't really recommend it. I still just say go with 2 because the first hit was doing almost nothing. You didn't even need to really defensive it. Again, it was pure physical. As long as you had your regular active mitigation up, you didn't really like that. I was in Consecrate. You didn't even notice my health move. I expected to hit a little bit harder, but even then I expected to be not too bad. So you're fine taking 2 stacks. What you're really worried about is actually Skynspinner, who is like the highest damage intake boss of anything in the raid so far, even a step up over the previous 2. And you can see I have this poison debuff here. It was not working on this testing, but in later testing, this stacked up with each hit. And basically you can see here, you can just see here on the corner, Poison Bolt, Poison Bolt, Poison Bolt, Poison Bolt. So what she does is she'll cast this in batches of like 4 to 6 casts, 4 to 6 casts, and just stack up the tank she's doing with this poison debuff. And so poison dispel is super good on the tank in this phase. You want to have someone probably babysitting whichever tank is tanking her at the moment, dispelling on cooldown, 4 stacks and then on cooldown kind of thing. Maybe even 2 poison dispels, to be totally honest with you. It's a lot of damage. It also has a bit of an upfront hit here, so be aware of that. This boss hits hard, so if you need to swap at 1 stack of a NERUB-AR just so that this boss has a tank that is able to tank her damage, then do that, because she is the real constraint here. NERUB-AR is not really very high tank damage. Skynspinner is a lot of tank damage. This then also gets a bit interesting in the second phase. We can just skip ahead. You can see Void Bolt is now a magic dot, and again, this does stack up. This was bugged at the moment, but this will stack up on you as a magic dot. So now you will need healers babysitting the tanks here and using a magic dispel on them to clear this dot. And again, this continues to happen in batches of like 4 to 6. So this is a very scary boss fight in terms of tank damage intake. In terms of actual boss mechanics outside of that to deal with in phase 1, there isn't a lot. The charge attack with the webs is usually not a tank thing for phase 1, so don't worry about the webs, just stay away from them. There's ads in phase 1, but they're fixate ads. I can probably find them. Yeah, these guys just fixate random players. You can CC them. You can like grip them in and stuff. So if you have things like that, you can do that and pull them onto the boss to cleave them down. But otherwise, they're just going to fixate and they're just going to get hit by DPS. Intermission's just a bit of a little dance here, nothing too crazy. For this phase, there's this dispel ability where you want to put 3 dispels on Skynspinner and it jumps to the nearest target when you dispel. So what you can see here is we purposefully separated the bosses a little bit so that it would be very easy for the debuffed players to run over here, dispel themselves or get dispelled rather, and put the debuff on the boss and not accidentally put it on a tank or anyone else, right? Because if you put these guys too close, you know, DPS, greedy DPS, they're going to get hit. They're going to be a little too close, right? They're going to tunnel vision. So we just decided on normal and heroic, we're just separating the bosses a little bit here to make it easier for people to get the dispels out. Also, not directly in the dead center of the room, because this boss jumps to the dead center to cast her big explosion ability. That's the one you need to interrupt. So that one needs a dispel as well. And you can see again, no one's in the dead center of the room. No one was on the old boss. Makes it really easy positioning wise. And then after that, we pull them together because there's a bit of a gap now between the actual next set of debuffs coming out. This pull-in happens. You can see this big circle. This deals ticking damage to you, and it basically pulls the whole raid in and attaches you to one other player. You want to break this by running 30 yards away and snap that tether and reduce that damage. In the last phase, you potentially need to not break that tether, because in this phase, this is the only way for you to actually stop Anubarish's charge. So I believe I might not break my tether here. Yes, you can see potentially, depending on who your RNG paired with in this phase, you may need to keep your tether and actually use it to stop Anubarish's charge here, and which is exactly what we do here. I got paired with a designated person. I'm like, okay, I'm not breaking my tether, and then we can stop Anubarish's charge in this phase. So in this phase, you may be responsible for doing that, so just be aware. And then otherwise, Sky and Spinner will alternate with Anubarash doing their ultimate ability. So the Dispels will now come out next, and then you'll need to do the 3 Dispels to interrupt Sky and Spinner, just like you did in phase 2. And again, Sky and Spinner is still doing Void Bolt in this phase. She's empowered, so she's still doing the magic dot. So if you have a healer with a poison and a magic spell, well, they're all going to have magic spells, but a healer with a poison spell, that's probably a good assignment for them, because then they can be dispelling the tanks the entire fight, and then you can put other healers on dispelling the actual magic debuffs on random players. But there we have it, guys. That is my normal and heroic tank tips for NERUB-AR Palace. Hopefully you did learn something here, and if you did, be sure to subscribe for more content like it, including general raid guides. I've got raid shorts coming out, the Queen Answer guide for normal and heroic coming next week as well, and then of course mythic raid guides when we start getting into that raid difficulty a couple weeks from now. Mythic Plus guides already on my channel, so we've got so much content. Make sure you do check it out. Otherwise, as always, I need to give a big thank you to all of my Patreon supporters for making content like this possible, and I'll see everyone in the next video.